two of the largest blue states in the country are on a course to increase greenhouse gas emissions and at the same time raise prices. We got this information from a release by the former Secretary of the United States Energy Department, Dr. Chu. I have invited one of the more important energy consultants, an associate of ours, to discuss what those two states are doing. And then we're also going to discuss what one of the red states is doing to possibly reduce greenhouse gases. My guest is Dr. Alex Cannara. Alex, how are you?
Hi, how you doing, Michael?
I'm good now that I see you. Dr. Chu's announcement is based on a study from MIT and Stanford University. What do you think of the findings of that paper?
Well, I think it's right on. They're spot on. They identified the things that many of us have been talking about for some years now with the state agencies like the California Public Utilities Commission and the Energy Commission as well. So I think it's a very good study, and I think Dr. Chu was very right to call attention to it.
All right. The state he focused his energy on was California. And he pointed out, I think what we all know, the state and the regulatory agencies of the federal government have all agreed that Diablo Canyon, our last nuclear energy plant, must be shut down. What do you think of that?
Yes, well, a group that I've supported for a long time called Californians for Green Nuclear Power has been contesting that in CPUC proceedings and with legal action. And the report that Dr. Chu is supporting from MIT and Stanford says that we should keep the plant and keep its clean electricity and use it for purposes that will reduce our emissions rather than increase it.
Good. And Dr. Chu concludes, or the study concludes, that if we shut down Diablo Canyon, it will increase California's greenhouse gas emissions by 10%. And now I don't think you've had a chance to look at the study, but I think Dr. Chu is not going to put his name related to that study unless that study says 10% increase in greenhouse gases.
Yes, well, I read the study points, and I agree totally with them. The issue is every time you close a nuclear plant, you have to replace the power output. And the way it's been replaced in California is by combustion, by gas, typically. Most of California's electricity is generated by burning gas. And as we know, gas leaks from the fracking wells and so forth, so it adds to the greenhouse gas content of the atmosphere beyond just CO2. And so we have to be very careful about our use of gas.
It's ironic that we use so much gas. Of course, you and I are in California. It's ironic because California presents itself as a leader in many, many areas. And here we are stuck with gas, and if we shut down Diablo Canyon, we have to replace it with more gas and maybe more solar panels, but I think we're putting in as much solar as we possibly can, and maybe more wind. And both of those types of, as you, I hope, will agree, are not sources of energy that we can call up in a demand situation.
That's very true. what's called a dispatchable power is what we need to run our society reliably. And we saw what happened in Texas and the cold snap that they had earlier in the year. So we don't want to have things like that happen. And California is on its way to doing that if we keep increasing our reliance on power, let's say from the sun, which is only up during the day, and from power from the wind, which is really relatively weak in California in most days of the year. So we have to be very careful about that. And Diablo Canyon and the former San Onofre nuclear plant supplied well over 20% of California's baseload power that could be relied on.
All right. What is forcing the shutdown of Diablo Canyon? The state of California?
It's interesting. I mean, it's highly political. It's highly political because there are certain interest groups like Mothers for Peace and NRDC and Friends of the Earth and so forth that are automatically against nuclear plants, nuclear power. Some of them I've identified in the past nuclear power with nuclear weapons, which is not at all valid since there's nothing inside a nuclear plant that you could make a bomb with.
So those organizations you just mentioned have influenced the California government
Yes.
to
Yep.
decide to set a date to shut down Diablo Canyon. What federal agency also is committed to the shutting down of Diablo Canyon?
I don't think that there's a particular federal agency that is. The politics in California are such that the agencies like the CPUC and the California Energy Commission are influenced by the politics in Sacramento. So I think that that's where the pressure could be supported, even though these various groups that have lobbied for shutdown for years and finally succeeded, even though they really don't care where they shut down a nuclear plant, whether it's in California or some other state.
Now, I just look at, I glance at Dr. Chu's letter, and I think I see the other organization is the United States Nuclear Regulatory Commission, is also signed up to have Diablo Canyon shut down. Does that ring true to you?
Well, they're not the prime mover on the effort. They're just approving whether or not the plans for shutting it down can be implemented properly.
All right.
They're a licensing agency, and so they don't really motivate the shutdown.
Thank you. What is the attitude of PG&E that owns and operates Diablo Canyon?
That's really a very good question, because the company that owns the plant has been harassed for years by these anti-nuclear groups, and so they're spending a lot of money defending themselves in proceedings and so forth. So they finally capitulated and agreed to shut it down in 2024, 2025. There's not really any reason, because it's a profitable plant. It makes money. It delivers about $1 billion a year to the San Luis Obispo County coffers, in terms of taxes and economic benefit to the citizens of that county. So it's really it's almost criminal to shut it down, because there's no problem with it. It has its own independent safety committee, which PG&E must listen to. PG&E cannot make changes to policy or operation of the plant without getting approval of the Diablo Canyon Independent Safety Committee, which you can actually go and see its proceedings online.
Okay, that's very good. Now I'd like to bring up this issue. I was with the vice mayor of Palo Alto the other day, and shortly I'm going to do a show with the mayor of San Mateo and the mayor of East Palo Alto. I believe each of those communities is dedicated and working toward moving all appliances, heat, etc., off of gas and requiring or motivating all the users to use electrical appliances, etc. And that's to help reduce greenhouse gases. But listening to you, Alex, and reading Dr. Chu's report, that PG&E, which provides all the electricity or energy in Silicon Valley, is going to be creating that energy using dirty gas. What do you think of that?
Yes, well, I wrote a brief editorial for a local paper on that because Menlo Park has decided that they should advocate electric appliances and heating only in new buildings in the city. And that sounds good, but it really depends on where the electricity comes from. If the electricity comes from coal burning, that's not good. If it comes from gas burning, it's not good. And currently, we're fortunate because of Diablo Canyon being owned by PG&E, that PG&E in our region is more than half clean because of the Diablo Canyon plant. If we close that plant, then the additional power needed would be taken up by gas combustion, even possibly in the future by coal burning out of California by Berkshire Hathaway Energy, which is Warren Buffett's company. So we have to be very careful about what we do when we think of substituting greenhouse gas producing fuel, doing some sort of substitution that doesn't make sense. So we definitely would benefit from maintaining Diablo Canyon operating in all of California, but certainly in its service area, which includes, the San Francisco area and the Bay Area, Silicon Valley, and so forth.
Alex, you have been very clear. So we just discussed one of the major states in the United States that appears to me, is on a course that will increase greenhouse gases and raise costs to the subscribers. Let's go to the second state, and that is New York. According to what I have picked up from analysts like you and others, that state is shutting down an important nuclear power plant. And would you give us some background on that? And then I'll ask you what you think of all of that.
Sure. The Indian Point nuclear plant, which is much the same as Diablo Canyon plant, on the Hudson River, about 35 miles north of New York City, operated for decades. And it too was attacked by anti-nuclear interests that didn't realize that nuclear plants don't make nuclear bombs. And so as a result of that, the owner, Entergy, finally decided enough of all this harassment and legal fees and so forth, and agreed that it should be shut down. It had 2 reactors like Diablo Canyon, and one was shut down in May 2020, one in May 2021 this year. And as a result, the emissions in the area around New York City have increased dramatically because it's been replaced by gas. And worse, in New York area, they burn oil in the winter if they have to, because gas is not always supplied fully to the northeastern United States in the wintertime. So they actually have to convert their plants to burn oil. As a result of that, the pollution in the region, particularly in an area called Asthma Alley between Queens and Brooklyn, is poorer neighborhoods get hit most with the emissions from the gas and oil plants there. This is interesting because it violates New York law. There's what New York legislature passed called the CLCPA, which was designed to prevent this kind of thing from happening, that poor neighborhoods would be victimized by emissions from power plants that are serving, the richer area. It's interesting that the Indian Point plant provided New York City with 25% of its power, and it was clean, no emissions, until it was shut down. And the other interesting thing is that Governor Cuomo was part of this whole thing, trying to shut it down. Even though, years ago he claimed that the plant was a ticking time bomb. Again, another kind of foolish reference to the danger that's imaginary around nuclear plants. And it must have had a very slow ticker because it just kept going and going and going without blowing up. So we have a real problem in understanding in the United States, and other nations are moving ahead with nuclear, which will strengthen their economy and reduce their emissions. And we're not doing that.
Let me interrupt. Indian Point is shut down already.
Yes, as of this past May.
And what is that doing, the shutting down of that, on greenhouse gases in the state of New York?
Right. So now they're burning gas. At least they're burning gas to replace it. At worst, they're burning oil.
What's your estimate of the percent of increase of greenhouse gases that will happen as New York State contributes to the nation's goal of reducing greenhouse gases to reduce the threat of climate change? You got a number on that?
I don't really have a number, but you can guess what it would be, because they have two other nuclear plants that are operating in northern New York State, and they've shut down this one, so it's about a third of what they could have been reducing their emissions by. So they've increased it by a third.
How safe are those other two nuclear power plants?
Oh, they're all fine. They're all registered and inspected and approved by the Nuclear Regulatory Commission.
All right. Now, you said there is this asthma alley, and you said most of the people who live in there are low-income folks. Am I correct?
Yes.
Would that then lead to me saying many of them are black or brown skinned persons?
I think you have to look at the demographics of Queens down to Brooklyn, but I haven't lived there in a long time, so I can't tell you.
I think somebody like Al Sharpton ought to take a look.
Yeah.
And if he discovers that black and brown people live there and they are subjected to the threat of cancer, lung disease, and many, many other diseases.
Yeah, the problem is what they call the PM2.5 particulates, which are particularly bad and produced by oil burning.
All right, so that's the second blue state that you would say is on a not so good course for the people of the country. Now, I think you have informed me that one red state in particular is on a course to some extent use nuclear energy, and that is Wyoming. What's happening in Wyoming with respect to nuclear energy?
I understand that the Gates and Buffett have invested in a company called Natrium, which is taking a design for a nuclear reactor that was developed many years ago in Idaho National Laboratories, and operated and demonstrated to be safe. And they're taking that and they're extending its abilities to store heat for periods later on in a day or a week when power demands would increase. So the reactor will produce power all the time, But if it's not needed as electricity, it will be stored as heat, and that heat can be recovered later on when electricity demand goes up, and that heat can be recovered to run turbines to generate electricity later. So that's a worthwhile design, and we just hope that they're successful in doing it.
Okay, so will that plant contribute to providing clean, green energy for the people of Wyoming and the industry?
Yes, I certainly would. Wyoming is a source of a lot of different products that we may not want, like coal. So it's good to have that reactor being developed there to ostensibly reduce its contributions to greenhouse gases.
All right, I'd like to go to one more topic. A week or so ago, I read that the United States Air Force is implementing micro atomic nuclear energy plants. What's that about, Alex?
Excuse me. Yeah, well, you can make a nuclear reactor pretty much any size you want. In the 1950s, the U.S. Air Force wanted to have a nuclear plane that could fly forever, effectively. So it wouldn't have to be taking off in response to some sort of Russian attack with bombers, that kind of thing.
Oh, before you continue, forgive me for interrupting, an idea came to mind. Nuclear missiles that would just continue to circle the Earth for year after year. God, what a thought. All right,
well, okay, so you remember that our military agencies are staffed by people and operated by and commanded by people. And they're a little competitive. So the Navy got the nuclear submarine, the Army got nuclear bombs, and actually we had a nuclear cannon. So they were happy. But the Air Force felt left out. So they decided that they wanted to have a nuclear plane. And in the 1950s, it's an interesting history. You can Google it. It would be too heavy to really fly, but at any rate, that was their idea. But that same project led to the development of small reactors. And that's very useful because the military bases must have power. We cannot have a military that is effectively able to respond to needs without it having reliable power for its bases, all the bases. Just like a nuclear submarine can operate for months without ever seeing the surface of the ocean. So nuclear makes a lot of sense because it's very small. That's the advantage of nuclear power, is that it's high density, very small. You don't have to build much of a building and take much land. Unlike solar and wind, which consume many times more resources. So as long as we have a small reactor capability, we should extend it to our military bases to make it all reliable. And it's that simple, really. There are military people who have been explaining this for years, why we should have nuclear power on bases.
I'm not sure. Does the United States Air Force have bases outside of the territories of the United States?
Well, they would in the case of a war, like when we were in Afghanistan. We had air bases at different locations that could access Afghanistan.
And I just want to pick up this point. Couldn't we build a small coal burning plant to provide the energy that a base needed?
Well, sure, you could have a coal plant. We had in Tennessee, where there's a coal plant that supplies power to Oak Ridge National Labs, where they do nuclear reactor development. So, I mean, that's kind of an odd combination. But as soon as you have something like coal or oil or gas, you have to have a supply of fuel, and the fuel has to be available all the time. That's obviously a constraint on a military base that military planners would not like, because the enemy could destroy it or destroy the line or the pipeline or whatever. Nuclear is so high energy density that one pound that you could hold in your hand will run thousands and thousands of homes and businesses. So the fuel is in the reactor. You don't have to have a fuel pipeline or a railroad or anything else supplying the reactor. It's got the fuel in it. It lasts for years, 2, 3, 4 years, 5 years maybe. And like a submarine, its nuclear reactor is able to run for 30 years for obvious reasons. You don't want the submarine coming to the surface at some foreign port to refuel.
Thank you, Alex. I have one question, and we only have about 2 minutes left. How dangerous is the waste from a nuclear power plant? Got no more than 2 minutes.
Oh, okay, it'll take less than that. So my finger here, there it is. Two of those fingers is the waste, nuclear waste, the actual nuclear waste from an OECD person, like an American, for a year, more than a year actually. But 2 fingers like this is the nuclear waste from all our uses, our vehicles as a person, all our uses for home, electricity, heating, our vehicles, our transportation by airplanes, and so forth. That's it. Now, if you can't find space to put 2 fingers of nuclear waste per each of our 300 million people in the United States, I don't know what other source of energy you could possibly find a place to put the waste for. I mean, if you talk to the CEO of Duke Energy, she was on TV and explained that they have 100 million tons of coal ash. Just think about that.
Good.
From generating electricity using coal, one coal company, one generating company, has 100 million tons of ash, and ash is light. It's not dense like uranium. So at any rate, there's no nuclear waste problem as far as we're concerned. There's a psychological problem because the government hasn't politically provided what they said they would. They would take the waste from nuclear plants. They haven't done that.
Quick question. It seems that nuclear waste might last, hundreds, thousands of years, and we should worry about that. None of us are going to be here, and we shouldn't worry about what climate change is going to do to us now.
Well, the amount of, what can I say? We're all radioactive. Yeah.
Alex, forgive me. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for tuning in. My guest, who has been spectacular today, is Dr. Alex Cannara. I am Michael Killen. Thank you.